Alexa, resume. Alexa, resume.
Resuming lore from Amazon Music. Episode 15, Unboxed.
Piece of her extended family. Generation after generation now makes room on their walls for as many of these framed treasures as they can acquire. People have a way of becoming attached to things. Maybe it's the long journey that these objects accompany us on through our lives, or perhaps it's due to the feelings they can invoke when we see them or touch them. Or maybe, deep down, we understand that even though our lives might be fleeting and temporary, these things, these objects we grow to love and revere, seem to live on after we're gone. This habit of attributing personality and emotion to our possessions is something known as anthropomorphism. We give human characteristics to things that are far from human. Some people name their cars and their popular. Others will say that their house has a lot of
Alexa, play.
What do you want me to play?
Alexa.
Don't miss out on Springfest savings.
All right.
Now at Lowe's.
I'm gonna restart it. I don't know what happened.
Plus, save an additional $100 on every $1,000 you spend on select major appliances. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last, see Lowe's.com for more details and qualifying items.
Visit your nearby Lowe's on Union Deposit Road in Harrisburg.
All right. At the grave of Glenvale, let's do it.
They include a lot more people than ourselves. Loved ones, neighbors, community we call home, and the
Now. Well, son of a bitch.
because even though our business is helping guide the climate, our ambition is to make where money is born. Connect with us at Riley's.com.
My great-grandmother was a painter. She picked it up late in life, but she produced dozens and dozens of oil paintings once she hit her stride. They're mostly still life studies and landscapes. But they're not Dutch masters by any stretch of the imagination, but to our family, they're precious. They connect us to her. Because of this, those paintings have become a centerpiece of her extended family. Generation after generation now makes room on their walls for as many of these framed treasures as they can acquire. People have a way of becoming attached to things. Maybe it's the long journey that these objects accompany us on through our lives, or perhaps it's due to the feelings they can evoke when we see them or touch them. Or maybe, deep down, we understand that even though our lives might be fleeting and temporary, these things, these objects, we love and revere, seem to live on after we're gone. This habit of attributing personality and emotion to our possessions is something known as anthropomorphism. We give human characteristics to things that are far from human. Some people name their cars and talk to them like a friend. Others will say that their house has a lot of nervous energy. They don't, but at the same time, they do. You know? The best place to see this practice in action is in the presence of children. The toys they cherish, the ones that follow them from room to room, would lay in their laps on long car rides, or get pulled under the covers with them at bedtime. Those objects take on a personality of their own. Oftentimes, it's just a game. Other times, it's a coping mechanism, a loss, a fear. But sometimes, on very rare occasions, these objects seem to set the rules themselves. They guide the children's decisions, as if someone or something were controlling them. I'm the nation, and this is more. In 1982, a backhoe operator was preparing a building site for development in Titusville, Florida. While working on one of his drawings, he noticed what he thought were rocks visible in the rock. But something didn't sit right with him, and so he climbed out to take a closer look. What he had thought to be stones actually turned out to be bones, specifically a human skull. The county medical examiner was brought in, but it became clear almost immediately that the bones belonged to someone who had died a very long time ago. When Florida State University became involved, they uncovered, so to speak, the truth. The bones belonged to a 3-year-old girl who had died more than 7,000 years before Florida had become a state. It was clear that she had been buried by her parents, though. They had wrapped her in cloth made from local plant fibers, and then placed her in a shallow grave. But she wasn't alone. With her in the ground, placed near her arms in case she wanted them, were her toys. It seems that children have had toys, objects that they loved and played with, thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands. The toys were still rare. In a world where everyone had to contribute to the welfare of the community, even children were expected to grow up fast and do their part. When they did have toys, they were often basic in shape, such as marbles or tops. They would also play with objects meant to represent the things most important to their village or clan. Toy animals, soldiers, religious icons, all are commonly found objects by archaeologists in the graves of ancient children. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks expected children to give up their toys when they came of age. Young women would actually take their toys to the local temple on the night before their wedding, where they would offer them as a sacrifice to the gods. These rules began to shift after the advent of the Enlightenment in the mid-1600s. Society became more affluent, and children weren't expected to work as often as they had previously. In addition, their toys became more complex and useful. The jigsaw puzzles were born in 1767 as a way of teaching geography, and board games from the same period were meant to entertain. Toys had evolved. But throughout all of history, it seems, across cultural boundaries and spanning thousands of years of art and technology, there has been one constant in the world of toys. From the tombs of the pharaohs in Egypt to the shelves of Target down the street, one toy has maintained a universal and timeless appeal. Dolls. They're little representations of us, after all. They personify the people we love and provide comfort to the lonely in a way that no other toy can. And because of that, people get attached. Children refuse to put them down. And even in adulthood, dolls have a tendency to be kept around. Sometimes, though, the roles are reversed. As unhealthy as it sounds, there have been more than a few stories of dolls, not children, who refuse to let go. They seem to take control, to set the tone, and dominate the lives of the people who own them. And sometimes, the consequences have been frightening. Thomas and Minnie Otto were a well-off and well-traveled couple who had a deep love of the arts. They were natives of Key West, Florida, and in 1898, they completed building a brand new home there on Eden Street. 2 years after moving in, the couple welcomed their third child to the family, a son they named Robert Eugene. They called him Gene, and the family quickly settled into their leisurely lifestyle in the Keys. They had more than enough money, and they spent it on convenience, which included a staff of caretakers around the house. Cooks and maids were always at the ready, including a woman who worked as little Gene's nurse. History doesn't remember her name. If you were a woman in 1904, it was pretty common, unfortunately. If your skin color was pale and European, the chances are you were. So we don't know her name. But we do know that she loved Jesus. She spent hours with him every day. She traveled with the Ottos on their journeys around the country, caring for him like a turn-of-the-century version of Knocking Down Manhattan. She was close to him. And that's probably why she gave him the doll. It was big, about the size of a 4-year-old boy, in fact. It was filled with straw, hand-sewn, and dressed in a white sailor's uniform. And he loved it. Every day, abroad and on day trips into town with his mother. It was said that Gene even sometimes wore a similar outfit and the two seemed like siblings. Gene called the doll Robert, using his own first name, and their relationship got off to a storybook start. The doll had its own chair near the dining room table, and Gene would sneak little pieces of food to it as the family ate. During bath times, the doll would be placed on a dry towel near the tub while Gene played in the water with toy boats and corks and all the usual things that little kids love to do. And at the end of the night, Gene would bring Robert to bed with him, and the two of them would be tucked in together. Everything about this is normal. My own children do similar things, naming their dolls and bringing them along for car rides. But for Gene, that's where the normality stopped, because not long after settling into a routine with his new toy, things got weird. And according to most reports, it all started with the talking. Gene's parents would often hear their son's voice coming from his bedroom as he played. Even though he was in there alone, it would always sound like he was in deep conversation with someone else. First they would hear his voice, sweet and tiny, and then another voice would reply, different and rougher than his own. Oftentimes the second voice would sound insistent, while Gene's would almost sound unnerved and flustered. Of course, Gene's parents assumed it was a game, and that he was simply playing make-believe. But over time, they began to second-guess that presumption. During a few of these apparent conversations, Gene's mother would quietly approach the boy's room, and then, without warning, she would burst into the room. Inside, it was said she found her son cowering in a corner of the room, arms wrapped around his knees, while Robert the doll sat on the bed or chair. She couldn't be sure, but it seemed to her like the doll was glaring at the boy. Things escalated from there. The Ottos awoke on a number of occasions to the sound of Gene screaming in his bedroom. They would rush to his room, only to find him sitting on the bed, furniture in the room overturned and his belongings strewn about. According to Gene, Robert was playing. Robert, the doll glaring at him from the foot of the bed. Robert did it became a common phrase around the Otto house after that. They didn't believe their son, of course, but the boy blamed the doll for most of the unusual activity. When his parents found toys that appeared to have been mutilated or broken, Gene said that Robert had done it. Sometimes the Ottos could hear giggling from somewhere else in the house. Sometimes this happened at night, and each time when Gene was supposed to be in bed. Dishes and silverware were often found thrown about on the dining room floor. Clothing would be found on the floor, appearing to have been shredded by some unknown person. Sometimes servants would enter unused guest rooms to find that the bedding had been disturbed and pushed off to the carpet. The staff would even find themselves locked out of the house when making their nightly rounds. If Gene was clearly not at fault, sometimes the servants themselves were blamed for the disturbances. As a result, turnover at the house was high, with a constant rotation of servants coming and going. One constant through it all, though, was Robert, the unusual doll in the white suit. And according to some reports, he did more than make a mess. He may have killed him. Hearing giggles from distant parts of the house was one thing. Sure, it would unnerve most of us. I know it would freak me out, but the Ottos soldiered on, putting up with the repeated excuses. They were strict parents, maybe even a little overbearing by today's standards, and were always quick to punish Jean for mischief. It was one thing to make a mess, but staff was hard to train, and having them frightened away all the time wasn't congruent with their life of convenience. And so they punished Jean. To the boy's credit, he appeared to have been a true believer in his stories. He would put up a small fight, blame the events on the doll, and then take the consequences like a responsible child. But there were other reports about the doll, and these were things that could in no way be blamed on the young Otto boy. Visitors to the house reported that the doll would blink. Some of them claimed to refer to laughter themselves, and at times when the Otto family wasn't even at home. Neighbors said they would sometimes see the doll in the upstairs windows, moving from one to another, glancing out through the curtains toward the street. Servants would find Robert in a completely different part of the house from where he had been left moments before. Sometimes the sounds of small little feet could be heard moving from room to room. All of this became too much, and extended families stepped in to find a solution. One of Jean's great aunts visited the family to plead her case. The doll was cursed, she said. Some evil spirit lived inside it, and if they wanted to be rid of the chaos and random episodes of disturbance, they needed to get rid of the doll once and for all. On her recommendation, Robert was taken away from Jean and placed inside a box. The box was then moved to the attic of the large house, out of sight and, at least in theory, unable to cast the shadow of fear over the house anymore. The next night, the aunt was found dead in her bedroom. She was an older woman, and so the official story that she had died of a stroke was passed around and believed by all. But the Ottos themselves didn't buy it. Out of fear for their own safety, Robert was brought out of storage and returned to their son's side. And that's how things remained. As all kids do, though, Jean eventually grew up. He trained as a painter, traveled throughout Europe, and eventually married an accomplished pianist. But after his parents passed away, the couple moved back to Florida and took up residence in his old childhood home on Eaton Street. Jean spent his days painting, and his wife Anne settled into domestic life. And somehow, in the middle of it all, according to the reports, was Robert. Rumors in town spoke of how the doll had a place at the dining room table, and there was a chair beside their bed for him to sit on during the night. And that Jean had a habit of taking the doll with him as he moved about the house. There were whispers that his wife Anne hated the doll. Unnerved by the presence of the doll so close to their marriage bed, it was said that she stopped allowing Jean to bring it into their room. And for a while, he complied. Robert was locked back in the attic, but according to reports, that didn't help. Robert would sometimes be found sitting in a rocking chair downstairs, even though he was supposed to have been locked upstairs in the attic. The couple would hear footsteps in the attic at night, and the soft, distant sound of laughter. Local legend claims that all of this drove Jean's wife insane, eventually ending her life. The study of folklore often encounters the same patterns throughout the world and across the centuries. One common theme that we see is the dehumanization of people of minority status. The witch trials stand as a somber example of this, where the accused, often women, often poor, and often social outcasts already, were stripped of their humanity and treated like animals and monsters. Robert the doll, though, stands on the opposite side of the spectrum. Rather than being one more tale of someone having their humanity stolen from them, Robert, a cloth and straw doll without a soul, appears to have had humanity bestowed upon him. Why? It's hard to say. Perhaps it's because Jean Otto's parents needed an excuse for their son's unusual behavior. Maybe it was a culture of superstition brought into the house by servants with ethnically different backgrounds. Somehow, a living, breathing Robert was an easier story to swallow than the alternative. We'll never know for sure whether Jean Otto invented it all. He passed away in 1974, with Robert at his side. For a while, the house remained uninhabited, unless you count Robert as a resident. But eventually a new family moved in and made the house on Eaton Street their own. They restored a lot of the original charm of the house, and in the process, they found the doll. Maybe they were compelled to, or maybe they had heard about it from locals. But for whatever reason, the new family packed up the doll and moved it to the attic. Eventually, though, the family donated Robert to a local museum. But it wasn't charity that motivated them. It was fear. You see, not long after moving in, they began to experience odd things. Things that Jean Otto would have known all too well. Soft giggling, light footsteps in the attic, and random, unexplainable messes. The family's 10-year-old daughter reported that the doll would appear in the house on its own, and on a handful of occasions, it even tried to attack her, a claim that she holds to even now as an adult. But the final straw happened later, when the girl's parents were awoken in the middle of the night. In the darkness of their room, they could hear laughter and the sounds of movement. Alarmed, one of them flicked on the bedside lamp, only to feel their hearts stop. There, at the foot of the bed, was Robert the doll, a kitchen knife in his hand.
Don't miss out on
That's
Spring
all
Fest
true.
savings happening now at Lowe's.
Look him up
Get
on
up to 40%
YouTube.
off select major
He
appliances.
resides at the
Plus,
East
save an
Ward
additional
Teller
$100
Museum in
on
Key West,
$1,000 you spend
Florida.
on select major appliances. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last, see Lowe's.com for more details and qualifying items.
Visit your nearby Lowe's on Union Deposit Road in Harrisburg.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include a lot more people than ourselves. Loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, we help plan your financial picture with a bigger picture in mind. Because even though our business is helping guide your finances, our ambition is to make it mean so much more. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
This episode of Lore was researched, written, and produced by me, Aaron Mankey. Lore is much more than a podcast. There's a book series in bookstores around the country and online, and the second season of the Amazon Prime television show was recently released. Check them both out if you want more lore in your life. I also make 2 other podcasts, Aaron Mankey's Cabinet of Curiosities and Unobscured, and I think you'd enjoy both. Each one explores other areas of our dark history, ranging from bite-sized episodes to season-long dives into a single topic. You can learn about both of those shows and everything else going on all over in one central place, theworldoflore.com/now. And you can also follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Lore Podcast, all one word, and then click that follow button. When you do, say hi. I like it when people say hi. And as always, thanks for listening.
From Amazon Music, resume Episode 6, Echo.
Customers have been singing our praises for years. With fast, local service, and an industry-leading 96...
Alexa, restart.
Restarting Episode 6, Echo.
Did you just call your boss Mom? Thanks, Mom. What? Did you get your pants caught in an escalator? Oh, no. Did you accidentally pick up someone else's kid from school?
Wait a minute, you're not...
Then you need teriyaki
How can you
madness.
pick somebody else's kid up?
You
could make it instead.
And it's so delicious, it fixes everything. Teriyaki madness. Crazy delicious. Find a location near you at teriyakimadness.com.
The setting of a story is everything. It creates mood and atmosphere. It triggers memories. It helps our minds fill in the blanks, adding tension and suspense where there was only words and images. What would The Shining be like without the long hotel hallways of the Overlook? Or The Legend of Hell House without the dusty bones of the old Alaska house? And how could anyone ever look at an old cabin in the woods without a chill?
Oh, that's very sense. I was like, what the heck? It's a fancy outfit.
One of the most iconic and most visceral settings from any horror scene, without question. It's always been the insane setting. Today we refer to the institutions that treat mental disorders as psychiatric. And thanks to a colorful college internship that featured a double amputee who enjoyed streaking down the hallway on his knees. Mental health professionals do amazing work. But a lot more than just the name has changed for these hospitals of the mind. In the late 1800s and through the 1950s, asylums were a very different place. They were filled with sick people in need of help. But frequently, they were only offered pain and suffering. When H.P. Lovecraft wrote The Thing on the Doorstep in 1933, he imagined a place that he called Arkham Sanitarium. Arkham is the seed. It's the first of its kind. Through it, Lovecraft brought the asylum into the horror genre, and others quickly caught on. The famous super prison and mental hospital of the Batman universe, Arkham Asylum, is a blatant and direct callback to Lovecraft's invention. Arkham was a real place, though, known as the Danvers State Hospital. In fact, the remains of it stand just 8 miles from my front door. And even before construction began in 1874, the hospital's story was already one of fear and suffering, a theme that continued unchecked well into the 20th century. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Before the days of institutional care for the mentally ill, the job was left largely to independent contractors, people who were hired by the state to look after others. But that was a system with far too many opportunities for failure. Patients were routinely placed in cages or stalls, and they were chained and beaten into submission. Violence, rape, and death were everyday occurrences. Thankfully, people began to look for a better way, a more humane way of caring for these individuals. And those conversations led to the establishment of a new state-of-the-art mental hospital. Plans started off on the wrong foot, though. The site that was chosen for the construction was the former homestead of John
Damn it, I
Hawthorne,
want to put up a
one
gate.
of the 9 magistrates who
I
oversaw
got a
the
toot
witch
for a
trials
challenge.
of Salem in 1692. Hawthorne was known for his vicious, harsh attitude toward those who were accused of witchery, and he pushed hard for their execution. He was so well known for his violent, hateful personality that his
Can I get
great-great-grandson,
one?
the author Nathaniel Hawthorne, changed the spelling of his last name, adding
Gates over here.
to distance himself from that reputation. It was there on Hawthorne Hill that the foundations of the hospital
It's gonna
were
go
laid.
up my ass crack.
The chances were pretty high that no one made the comparisons at the time. Hindsight is always
No,
20/20.
I can't get a gate,
Looking
not
back over
yet.
the last century and a half, it's clear that Hawthorne's legacy lives on atop that hill. The Danvers State Hospital was actually intended to be a beacon of hope. There was a specific plan behind its design, one that was based on the work of Dr. Thomas Kirkbride. He designed the building with 4 radiating wings on each side of a central structure. His reason was simple. With more of the rooms exposed to sunlight and proper ventilation, more of the patients would experience recovery. All told, the hospital was designed to house 500 patients covering a wide spectrum of mental illness, who were served by a team of roughly 12 staff. When the doors finally opened in 1878, it was originally called the State Lunatic Hospital, and there was no other place like it in the country. It was set up to be a leader in the humane treatment of patients and became the model for countless other facilities like it. And rightly so. This place was amazing. The ornate interiors, private rooms, sunny corridors, all connected to the central Kirkbride building. The patients were encouraged to exercise and participate in the community gardens outside. The small farm there even produced enough food for the hospital kitchen to feed the patients homegrown meals. Over time, though, the hospital expanded. There were separate tuberculosis buildings, housing for staff, a machine shop, a medical building, and a pump house to pull water from the reservoir. All of these locations were connected underground by a network of dark, brick-lined tunnels arranged in the shape of a wagon wheel to allow easy movement during the harsh New England winters. As with all good things, in addition, decreased state funding prevented them from hiring more help. By the 1920s, the population had grown to over 2,000 patients, 4 times what the facility was designed to hold. One eyewitness reported that in November of 1945, the evening shift of the hospital consisted of 9 people, and they were expected to care for the needs of more than 2,300 patients. You'll have to pardon the expression, but things at the Danvers State Hospital had begun to get crazy. Patients were frequently sick and filthy. It was not uncommon for some to die unnoticed, only to be found days later. It was nearly impossible for the staff to manage so many patients, and so they turned to the acceptable tools of their time. Straitjackets, solitary confinement, even restraints, however barbaric they might seem to us today, were mild compared to some of the other methods used by the staff. Patients were regularly subjected to hydrotherapy and electroshock therapy, and yet it somehow still managed to get worse. And that's where the lobotomy enters this story. First pioneered by Dr. Walter Freeman in 1936, the lobotomy was a complicated procedure. The surgeon would literally cut the patient's brain, severing the connection between the frontal lobes and the thalamus. The goal was to reduce symptoms and make the patient more manageable. The results were mixed. Some patients died as a result of the procedure, while others would commit suicide later. Freeman, though, quickly grew tired of how long it took to complete the procedure. He heard of a doctor in Italy who had operated on his patients through their eye sockets. Working without drilling or cutting presented an opportunity that Freeman simply couldn't pass up. He called his technique the transorbital lobotomy. It's fairly easy to describe, but it's not for the faint of heart. Freeman discovered that the only surgical tool he really needed was an ice pick. According to his son Franklin Freeman in a PBS interview in 2008, those first ice picks came right out of their kitchen icebox. And they worked like a charm. By inserting the ice pick into the inner corner of a patient's eye, Freeman could punch through the skull to reach the brain. Then he would essentially stir the frontal lobe until it was no longer functional. Oh, and one more thing. He did all of this without anesthetic. And he got good at it. So good, in fact, that he took his show on the road. He literally toured the nation in a van that he called the Lobotomobile, stopping at mental institutions where he would educate and train the staff in his own technique. While he was there, he would perform as many lobotomies as they needed for the low cost of just $25 per patient. It sounds like Freeman was delivering the solution to a desperate industry. That was pretty far from the truth. His patients often lost the ability to feed themselves or use the bathroom unassisted, and those skills would have to be retaught, if it was even possible. And while many patients recovered, about 15% died from the procedure. Relapses were common, and sometimes the lobotomy would have to be reattempted. Once, in 1951, at Iowa's Cherokee Mental Health Institute, Freeman stopped in the middle of a lobotomy, ice pick clutched in his hand, so that he could pose for a photograph. The instrument penetrated a bit too far, and the patient died. He never wore gloves or a mask, and he apparently had no limits. In fact, of the 3,500 lobotomies that he performed in 23 states, 19 of those patients were minors. One of them, a 4-year-old child. Ironically, some people still don't believe in monsters. The horror of institutional lobotomy ended in 1954 when a new drug was brought to the market. Thorazine was marketed as a chemical lobotomy, and the need for the surgical procedure dropped dramatically. But the nightmare never really stopped at Danvers State Hospital. During the 1980s, reports began to filter out about missing teenage patients. One account I managed to find said that upwards of 115 patients had disappeared in the space of about 3 months. The hospital never spoke about it publicly because their closure was already looming on the horizon. They knew that it was happening. When the staff was questioned, they all pointed to a new doctor on the staff. In each case, they said these patients had been assigned to this new doctor upon admission and then vanished. Scraps of paper were found in several of the patients' rooms that mentioned a tall man and woods. Some were drawings of the man, and some were just illegible to make out at all. As the pieces were slowly put together, it became clear that this doctor had been taking patients outside of the building without permission for unknown reasons. Tried to take the man into custody, they found he too was gone, and his patients were never found. But this was just one more tragedy in a long string of bad news.
that had wrapped itself around Danvers State Hospital beginning in the 1960s. Massive budget cuts, building closings, and structural damage had all conspired to slowly push the doors closed. By 1985, nearly every building on campus was abandoned, and the Kirkbride Administrative Building itself even closed in 1989. The last remaining patients were moved to the medical building on site, but were all eventually moved to other facilities with the help of the National Guard and 80 ambulances. The hospital was officially abandoned in the summer of 1992 and stood vacant and derelict for nearly a decade. The rooms that once played host to mindless victims of Dr. Freeman and his ice pick became the home of homeless squatters. They built their lives around the decaying medical equipment, the wheelchairs, the bed frames. It was probably the healthiest inmate population the building had known for decades. In 2005, the property was purchased by a developer, and much of the campus was demolished to make way for a sprawling apartment complex. But they left the front facade of the Kirkbride building with its soaring Gothic towers and intricate brickwork. The hospital didn't go quietly. In April of 2007, 4 of the apartments, as well as a handful of construction trailers, mysteriously burned down.
I'm gonna take a break because I'm
fire
getting
was so
hungry.
big that it was visible
Danny.
from Boston, 17 miles to the south. There was an investigation, but it turned up no evidence, other than webcam footage from the construction site.
Alexa off. Alexa off. And I'll be back.